What's up, everybody? I am Jason C, and today on The Mash and Drum, we are taking a look at my biggest surprises and disappointments in the world of whiskey for 2020. Now, this list includes some new distilleries and some well-known heavy hitters. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what bourbons and whiskeys were your biggest surprises and your biggest disappointments for 2020 as well. What I'm going to be doing is alternating between surprise and disappointment, and then capping both lists off with my number one picks from both categories. So let's start with some good news. Here is my first surprise bourbon of 2020. Nestled in the heart of Lake Tahoe watershed just outside of Fallon, Nevada since 1854 is Fry Ranch. Fifth generation farmer and CEO Colby Fry saw an opportunity to expand his farming expertise into distillation and considers himself a whiskey farmer. This is 45% ABV, which is 90 proof, the mash bill of non-GMO corn, winter cereal rye, winter wheat, and 2-row barley, non-chill filtered, straight bourbon aged for 4 years. This retails for about 50 bucks. It was limited just to Nevada for a little while, but it's starting to expand and get out there a little more. This bourbon really surprised the hell out of me. I mean, it was so velvety on the mouthfeel. It just had such good flavor. Very impressive for a 4-year-old bourbon. The mash bill was very interesting as well. There is some youthfulness to it, but it doesn't drink that way the more you get into this bourbon. I feel like the older this stuff is gonna get, as we see it down the line, get into 6, 7, 8 years old, as this stuff gets older, I think this is gonna be some of the best stuff available in the country. All right, next up is my first disappointment, and that's the Kentucky Owl Dry State. Now, Kentucky Owl Dry State is an extremely rare blend of Kentucky Owl's most precious barrels. Following the 18th Amendment and passage of the Volstead Act, America went into a dry state, and this rare blend pays homage to this. So this bourbon was blended by the amazing Dixon Dedmans, 100 proof, supposedly a blend of 12 to 17-year-old bourbons were in this bottle. Now, I got a chance to try this from a media sample, and I thought for an 100 proof bourbon, it was a very impressive blend. Now, I realize it's basically a collector's item, and maybe most people that buy this bottle won't even drink it. I will say it was soft, it was creamy, it was buttery, had a really nice complex finish for a 100 proof bourbon, but also delicate and soft at the same time. Now, the bourbon itself was great and blended masterfully, but my disappointment is with the price, which was $1,000 retail. Now think about that. Pappy Van Winkle, the coveted bourbons from Buffalo Trace, are 15, 20, and 23-year-old, and they carry MSRPs of $120, $200, and $300 respectively. Now, I realize for Pappy, the secondary market and just pricing at retail outlets are, through the roof, but many people still get a chance to buy them at MSRP each year, whether or not they intend to drink them or resell them. Now, the owners of Kentucky Owl are called SPI Group, and they're best known for making Stola Shania vodka. And for them to set the MSRP at $1,000 says that this bourbon commands 3 times more hype than Pappy Van Winkle 23-year, which I just think is ridiculous. Dixon Dedman gets a lot of flack for the prices of Kentucky Owl, and I think it's unfair to him. He blends it, but he's not setting the price points. My beef is with SPI Group for making this a $1,000 bourbon that was in the stratosphere of $1,500 to $5,000 once marked up in retail and secondary. Ridiculous. My next surprise is Chattanooga Whiskey 111. Now, it's an unfiltered barrel strength expression of Chattanooga Whiskey's signature high malt bourbon. It's aged for at least 2 years and toasted and charred 53-gallon barrels before bottling at 111 proof, and we're only retailing for about 45 bucks. This bourbon really surprised me. The high malt mash bill, I really wasn't sure what to expect, but it had flavors of honey, toasted bread, some butterscotch, some raisin flavors. It just all was a beautifully rounded out bourbon. I couldn't be more excited about exploring more Chattanooga whiskey expressions. Now, if you watch my review, these guys have an amazing story. They basically built a distillery before it was even legal to distill anything in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was really surprising. So I got a chance to sit down with one of the co-founders, Tim Pearson, and also talk about the history, as well as our head distiller, Grant McCracken, who's got a legendary name, Grant McCracken. That's amazing. He came from the beer industry, so I think he put a little bit of his high malt experience into the Chattanooga whiskey. They're using caramel malted barley, honey malted barley, to really give this stuff a sweet flavor, something a little bit unique. This, like I said, this surprised me in the best way possible. I cannot wait to try more stuff from Chattanooga. They also had a rye that was very impressive, so go check out Chattanooga whiskey as well. I'm gonna take a sip of this. I still can't believe this is what it is. This is my #1 surprise whiskey of the year, so I'll tell you what it is at the end of the video. So my next disappointment is the Old Forester Birthday Bourbon for 2020. Now, I didn't get a chance to buy this bottle, but I was astonished to see that these bottles were going for $650 to $700 in the secondary market, which was insane, especially once I tried it. Now, I was lucky enough to try this from a media sample that Old Forester sent. I love me some Old Forester. This year's Birthday Bourbon to me was just different. It wasn't terrible, it just wasn't what I expected from a birthday bourbon. My favorite, I think, from the last couple of years has still been that 12 year from 2018. The 11 year last year was delicious, but this year, now 2018 was 12 years old, last year 11, this year was 10 years old, 98 proof, so we're getting lesser in proof, lesser in age. I hope that's a pattern that stops as we get into next year. I hope these start getting a little bit older and a little bit more higher in proof again. It just came off a little bit more tropical for me this year than anything. I got a lot of like pineapple, mango, some barrel char notes. It was sweet. You got your typical vanillas, hint of banana. It was good. I just think there was a lot better bourbons out there that were cheaper and easier to find. And again, the fact that people were paying $600 to $700 for that bottle this year just absolutely blew my mind. All right, my next surprise is Barrel Armida from Barrel Craft Spirits. Now, this whiskey was bottled at 112 proof, retailed for about 90 bucks, and was one of the most interesting whiskeys I have ever tasted. This bottle contains bourbon whiskeys finished in pear brandy, Jamaican rum, and Sicilian Amaro casks. Yeah, it's weird. But the combination of blending these 3 finishes into a single blend resulted in one of the most interesting creations I've ever tasted in a bourbon. It kind of took me back a little bit. It had flavors that I had to keep going back and tasting, and I had to keep revisiting a few times, taking small sips and trying to figure out exactly what was going on. Now, the more time I gave it, the more sips I took, the more I liked it. It's very floral sweet, it's complex, and I think it's one of those love it or hate it type of whiskeys. And because of that fact, it really surprised me in 2020. And I still think I'm leaning towards loving this one more than hating it. Next disappointment is the Elijah Craig Rye Whiskey. Now, this released earlier on in the year, about January or February-ish, but retailed for about 35 bucks, which is an amazing price, but it was only released in a very limited number of markets. Not many states got to see this, and once it did come in, it was gone pretty fast. Now, the thing with this one is that this is, to me, was a, kind of a take it or leave it rye. I applaud Heaven Hill for bringing an affordable rye to the market, but the fact that they didn't make it that accessible, and it really was more of a bourbon profile than a rye profile. I mean, it had some good rye notes in there, but there really wasn't anything super special about it. I just think for what's available on the shelf today in the market of rye whiskeys, this was kind of an afterthought, unfortunately. Next surprise is the bourbon and rye coming out of Woodinville Whiskey. Now, Woodinville is a distillery located in Washington State. I got to try this a little bit earlier on in the year, and I was very impressed with what flavors this stuff brought for, again, a 4 to 5 year old bourbon and whiskey. Their bourbons, their ryes, all were extremely impressive. Now, the best thing about them is how they age their whiskeys. Now, what they do is they source their own grains from a local farm called the Omlin Family Farm, where they get all their grains to make their, delicious whiskeys. What they do is that is then mashed and then barreled, and then what they do is they take those barrels and then they truck them over the Cascade Mountains in Washington to age, where the climates are a little bit more variable for more flavor. So between their ryes, their bourbon, this is a cask strength release that one of my viewers, Joseph Brazo, was kind enough to send me because it's not available here yet where I am in Ohio, but I was very impressed with it. It's got like this really cool mix of like root beer, cream soda, vanilla, a little bit of chocolate. I absolutely love this stuff. This definitely stood out to me as an impressive younger whiskey. If you haven't tried Woodinville yet, definitely give it a go. So my next disappointment is Larceny Barrel Proof. Now again, just like the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof series, these released in January, May, and September throughout the year. They had 3 different releases, an A batch, a B batch, and a C batch. This one is one of those that I wanted to like it, but it just never panned out for me. It just didn't taste like a wheater. The A batch didn't taste like a wheated bourbon at all. It tasted like Cracker Jacks and peanuts and that typical Heaven Hill flavor profile. And then B and C got a little bit more on the wheater side, definitely better than A, but still wasn't really my thing. Now, again, this is one of those bourbons that I applaud Heaven Hill for bringing to the market. There are not many available cask strength wheated bourbons on the market. So the fact that they brought this to the market, everyone was really excited for this. The biggest difference here with Heaven Hill is they go in the barrel 125 proof with their wheated bourbon mash bill. A lot of other distilleries historically don't do that. They go into the barrel at a lower proof point, you know, whether it be 110, 115, even lower than that, because wheat is a little bit more of a delicate grain. Heaven Hill does not do that. They go in at 125, and I think it just kills a little bit of the flavor that you get from the wheated bourbon. This, I hope, gets better next year for 2021. We'll see how it goes, but right now, this fell flat for me in 2020. One of my favorite surprises of this year is this Cooper's Craft 100 proof barrel reserve from Brown-Forman. A lot of people don't know that this is from Brown-Forman. So Cooper's Craft uses some chiseled and charred barrels to impart a little bit more oak and probably just make this seem a little bit older than it is. Now it's 100 proof, like I said, it's from Brown-Forman. It's very affordable. You can find this for about 27 to 30 bucks around. It's an absolutely delicious bourbon. This one became one of my new daily sippers this year. You know, in the time of COVID, kind of sitting at home, I was going to this bottle more often than not. It's definitely got some Brown-Forman-esque notes. It's got that beautiful, that oak profile to it, that nice sweet oak that you definitely taste from Brown-Forman. You know, maybe the slightest hint of banana, but really not too much at all. It's got a little bit more oak than anything, some cinnamon, some nice baking spices. Lots of vanilla. I absolutely love this one. I know it's a little bit harder to find, I think, in total around the US, but if you see this Cooper's Craft 100 proof barrel reserve, do not hesitate to pick it up. All right, so next disappointment is the very old St. Nick bourbon from the old St. Nick distillery in Bardstown. Now, these guys definitely have some history. This brand was created initially for the Japanese market. They brought it back. They have had some amazing releases. They had a 17-year-old reserve that was actually Stitzel Weller juice. I got to try a very small sip of that, and that was phenomenal stuff. But their regular releases that they came out with, I was very excited to try this one coming off that 17 year, and I know you really can't compare. This was probably my most disappointing purchase this year because it was over $200 for this bottle. It didn't really have any sort of finish. It had good flavor, but I mean, it just didn't do anything for me. Even at 90 proof, which, you know, you would think that, okay, you're not gonna get a ton of flavor from that, but I did have a chance to taste some 90 proofers this year that were very impressive, way more impressive than this, and half the price. So the next surprise is the Bulleit Bourbon Blender Select. Now this was crafted by Bulleit blender Ebony Major. This Kentucky straight bourbon is one of 2 limited edition whiskeys launched by Diageo in spring 2020 in its new Craftswomen series, a series which celebrates the women who make the brand spirits. Now Blender Select number 1 uses 3 out of 10 bourbon distillates which are used to create Bulleit bourbon. Now this was said to be around 9 years old, 100 proof, and for a Bulleit product, now I know Bulleit makes some great bourbons that a lot of people like because it's affordable, but Bulleit just never really did it for me. Their new single barrels have been absolutely phenomenal, but before I got to try those, I got to try this, and I think what Ebony Major created here was something that I wasn't too crazy about at first. Now when you hear that this bottle uses 3 out of 10 distillates in the blend, you pretty much know that this is Four Roses. So Bulleit sourced a bunch of whiskey from Four Roses, which also uses 10 different recipes. So Ebony Major used, I think, 3 of those to put into this bottle to make an amazing blend. This was one of those bottles that I wasn't too crazy about at first, but the more I got into this, which I think is a pretty distinct trait of Four Roses. A lot of people that first try Four Roses don't go too crazy for it. Definitely has a unique flavor, high rye mash bill. But man, once this thing opened up, I could not stop drinking it. This is my second bottle that I got of it. Absolutely loved it. Huge surprise coming out of Bulleit. Ebony Major absolutely killed this one, and I can't wait for the next blend. So next disappointment is Elijah Craig 18. This is a bottle that I waited on buying forever and ever and ever. Why? Because it's an 18-year-old bourbon that's bottled at 90 proof. I said there's no way that that can be worth a price point of 130 bucks. Now, I still think for 130, an 18-year-old bourbon is actually a really good price. As we saw, the very old St. Nick that I mentioned before was only 12 years old and $250. This is a $130 18-year-old single barrel bourbon from one of the best distilleries in the land, Heaven Hill. However, when I tried it, it just fell flat. It was oaky. There wasn't much of a finish going on. I do realize that these are single barrels. I have had one or two of these that have been impressive, but when you think about some of the other bourbons that Elijah Craig offers, including Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, which is a 12-year-old non-chill filtered bourbon at full proof with all the full flavors that you love, this just kind of falls by the wayside, and I probably won't buy one of these again. Next surprise is, what do you know, Woodford Reserve. Now, this was my last review of 2020 that I just did recently, and I was blown away by this bourbon. Now, remember how I said before when I was talking about the very old St. Nick, how a 90 proof bourbon, you know, when you would think even the Elijah Craig 18 for 90 proof, you wouldn't think it would have a long finish or be very complex. This bourbon kind of crushed that notion for me because this is a 90.4 proof bourbon from Woodford Reserve. They generally bottle a lot of stuff at 90.4 proof. This contains 17-year-old bourbon, which is the oldest bourbon that Woodford Reserve has ever released. It is fruity, it is sweet, it's complex, it's dark, it's rich. It's got some really nice sweet oak to it. I absolutely love this stuff. Had a nice peppery finish for a 90 proofer. I think Chris Morris and Elizabeth McCall blended this to perfection. I know still a lot of people are skeptical of this one, but if you want to try a 90 proofer, that has 17-year-old bourbon in it. Again, this is about 120, 130 bucks. Again, that's expensive for a lot of people, but you have to look at today's market and what people are charging. Most special releases, most bourbons that are harder to find now are coming in at over $200 to over $250. Surprised the hell out of me. Loved it. All right, so my next disappointment is the Knob Creek 15. This was a special release by Jim Beam. They took some of those 15-year-old beautiful barrels that we see from their barrel picks, those 15-year-old 120 proof monsters that are about 45 to 50, maybe 60 bucks in some areas, that are absolute steals and some of the best values on the market still today. So what Jim Beam did is they took some of those 15-year-old barrels, they made a small batch offering that was a limited edition that was only 100 proof, and we got this. This was Knob Creek 15, which is an oaky, nasty, flat mess. I couldn't stand it. It's only this empty because I gave it out as much as I could for people to try it because they didn't believe me that it was as bad as I said it was. Now, I will say there was some definite batch variation with this. I know people that got amazing bottles of this stuff. They said it was fruity. They said it was sweet, had some great oak balance. I was like, what the hell are you tasting? And then I got to try a couple of those other variations and they were right. So it's not so much that this bottle was bad overall. This one in particular, the one I particularly bought, was bad, but there were some good ones out there. I think what made this so disappointing was the batch variation. There was a lot of inconsistency with this bottle, unfortunately. And to me, it just was not worth the pickup. It wasn't worth the chance of dropping 100 to 120 bucks on a 15-year-old bourbon that might be crappy or might be amazing. All right, we've gotten to the point where we're gonna get to my surprise whiskey of the year here. This is what's in the glass. It might really surprise you. It's this one right here. It's the George Dickel 11-year bottled and bond for 2020. This bottle of Tennessee whiskey, now the reason why it surprised me so much is because you think George Dickel, you think Flintstone vitamins. That's what a lot of people think. It's got that mineral, grainy type flavor profile to it that not a lot of people like. It's one of those love it or hate it whiskeys. But this, coming off the 13-year last year, which was a Flintstone vitamin bomb, this thing was just rich with butterscotch, caramel, vanilla, not a lot of that Flintstone vitamin. It's there. That mineral aspect is there, but this just tasted delicious. After I reviewed this, I ran out and bought two more bottles. It was that good. I've been sipping on this. But as far as new releases and with this bottle and bond, this really stood out to me. I love this stuff. I thought it was delicious. Hey, George Dickel, surprise whiskey of the year right here. And now to my top disappointment of 2020, Eagle Rare 17. Now, this is a damn good bourbon. It's delicious. If you get it for retail on this is about, what, 110, 120 bucks? For a 17-year-old bourbon, it's a very, very good value if you could get it at that price. But this is probably the hardest bottle to find in the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection lineup. If you look at it across the board, usually the least amount of bottles are, for Eagle Rare 17. There's just not many of them out there that they release from the BTAC collection. Now, this says 17 on the label, but it's actually an 18-year-old bourbon that's in this bottle. I think it's 18 years and 2 months or 18 years, 4 months, something around that. Now, this was bottled at 101 proof, which I was really excited to try an Eagle Rare at a higher proof, especially with that age statement on it. This was an absolute cherry bomb. Just cherry, cherry, cherry. This is reminding me a little bit of George T. Stagg at a lower proof with a much softer finish. Now, the thing with this one is that you see this bottle going for sale for $1,500 to $2,000 to $2,500, and I think that's mainly because of its rarity and its age. I think my expectations were a little bit high on this. I was expecting more from it. I wanted more flavor punch. I wanted just more from the bottle, a lot more viscosity on the mouthfeel. It just didn't happen. As much as I like this bourbon, I just didn't love it. I was expecting so much more coming from this bottle when I tried it. What I gotta say, I gotta keep it real. It just wasn't what I expected. But again, as I always mention, Buffalo Trace isn't really known for long, complicated finishes. Their stuff literally just tastes like candy and it finishes like candy, very sweet. And that's what this one did. It was cherry, it was grape, a lot of vanilla, some good oak notes to it. Complex for sure, but just not what I expected, especially with the lore surrounding this bottle in particular, especially the price point. If you see this in a store at retail, it's an automatic pickup, but do not buy this at $1,500 to $2,000 to $2,500 and what other crazy ass prices that people are commanding for this bottle. It's just not worth it. All right, guys, well, thanks for watching this video for my top surprises and disappointments of 2020 in the world of whiskey. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the subscribe button below. Please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram, find me on Twitter. Let me know down in the comments what your top disappointments and your top surprises of 2020 were. And as I always say, it's not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. So cheers. Welcome in 2021. Let's see what this year brings in the world of whiskey. Cheers. See you next time on The Mash and Drum.